On a mist-covered plateau in the mountains of Antioquia, where the air grows thin and the clouds descend low enough to swallow entire valleys, there stands the skeletal remains of a property that once pulsed like the heart of an empire. The gates are rusted now. The fountains are dry. The silence is almost aggressive. But there was a time when this estate was the axis around which power, fear, loyalty, betrayal, and blood revolved. This was not merely a mansion. It was a fortress disguised as a paradise, a family home wrapped in barbed wire, a palace built with money that carried the scent of gunpowder. Within its walls, laughter echoed beside whispers of death. Decisions made in its halls reshaped governments, destabilized nations, and altered the lives of millions. Its corridors absorbed secrets. Its floors witnessed arguments, celebrations, conspiracies, and the quiet weight of inevitability. The mansion was not only a residence, it was a command center, a sanctuary, a prison, a myth. This is the story of the house that rose from ambition and was consumed by its own shadow, the terrible history of Pablo Escobar's mansion and the empire that radiated from its walls. Long before it became a symbol of excess and paranoia, the mansion began as an idea drawn from obsession. The land chosen for its construction lay in the rolling hills outside Medellin, elevated high enough to command a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. From this vantage point, the city appeared distant, small, almost harmless. The mountains created a natural barrier. Mist often rolled in before dusk, cloaking the slopes in a white haze that softened outlines and muffled sound. It was beautiful, isolated, strategic. The structure rose from the earth with deliberate grandeur. Expansive terraces faced westward to capture the fading sun. Marble columns framed wide entryways. Massive glass panels reflected the sky during the day and glowed from within at night. Imported materials arrived in convoys: Italian stone, handcrafted tiles, rare woods polished until they mirrored light. Workers labored in silence under supervision, aware that this was not an ordinary commission. Security was embedded into the design from the beginning. Reinforced walls concealed steel cores. Observation points were hidden behind decorative arches. Long, curved driveways forced vehicles to slow before reaching the entrance. Guard posts were built to resemble ornamental structures, blending defense with elegance. Even the gardens were arranged strategically, dense hedges that created visual blind spots for anyone approaching on foot, but clear sight lines from within. Inside, the mansion felt expansive, yet strangely enclosed. High ceilings amplified footsteps. Chandeliers cast long, fragile shadows that trembled against white walls at night. The air often carried a mixture of polished wood, expensive cologne, and the faint, metallic trace of weapons oil. The rooms were large but never fully silent. Distant radios crackled, telephones rang in short-coded bursts, and heavy doors opened and shut with deliberate force. The living quarters were opulent. Silk drapes framed tall windows. Custom-made furniture dominated wide spaces designed for gatherings. A grand dining hall stretched long enough to seat dozens, its polished table reflecting candlelight like a dark river. Crystal glasses caught the glow. Silverware gleamed. Meals here were not merely family dinners, they were performances of power. Beyond the main structure lay the recreational grounds. Swimming pools tiled in vivid blue, a private soccer field, terraces designed for barbecues and celebrations. There were guest houses for allies and associates, each equipped with its own security detail. Further out, hidden within the estate's perimeter, smaller structures served more discreet purposes: storage rooms, communications hubs, and isolated spaces where conversations could occur without echoing into the main house. At night, the property transformed. Floodlights bathed the exterior in harsh illumination, cutting through darkness like interrogation lamps. Armed guards rotated shifts along the perimeter fence. The distant hum of generators ensured that electricity never faltered. Dogs barked intermittently, then fell silent. Helicopters occasionally passed overhead, their rotors slicing through the mountain air, reminding everyone inside that the outside world was restless. Within these walls, family life attempted to exist. Children ran through hallways too large for their footsteps. Their laughter bounced off marble floors. Bedrooms were decorated with toys, posters, and soft blankets, attempts to construct normalcy inside a structure engineered for control. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread in the mornings. Domestic staff moved quietly, aware of both privilege and danger. Yet even during moments of apparent calm, tension lingered like humidity before a storm. Meetings unfolded behind closed doors in the study, a room lined with dark wood shelves and thick carpets that absorbed sound. Maps were spread across desks, names were spoken in lowered tones. Decisions carried consequences, measured in distance and blood. The mansion stood as the physical embodiment of a growing empire. It was built not only to display wealth, but to anchor authority. Every corridor, every window, every reinforced beam served a purpose beyond aesthetics. It projected permanence. But beneath the polished surfaces, beneath the chandeliers and imported stone, there was always the awareness that the outside world was watching. The mansion was a kingdom on borrowed time. Morning in the mansion began before the sun cleared the mountains. A pale blue light seeped through the glass panels, stretching across marble floors like a silent tide. The air at that altitude was cool and damp, clinging to skin and fabric. From the terraces, mist rolled slowly across the hills, obscuring the valley below. The estate seemed suspended in clouds, detached from reality. Inside, however, reality was always present. The household stirred in carefully orchestrated rhythm. Guards rotated shifts with mechanical precision, boots striking stone in steady cadence. Radios emitted low bursts of static. The metallic click of rifles being inspected echoed briefly before being swallowed by thick walls. Even the birds that gathered along the outer hedges seemed cautious, their songs sharp and intermittent. In the private wing, the atmosphere was different, softer, but never free of tension. The bedrooms were spacious, adorned with elegant furniture and heavy drapes that filtered the morning light into muted gold. The scent of polished wood mixed with faint traces of perfume and cigar smoke lingering from the night before. Family life unfolded within a controlled bubble. Breakfasts were served in a sunlit room overlooking the grounds. Fresh fruit, warm bread, dark coffee, the table gleamed beneath crystal and silver. Conversations were sometimes light. School lessons, plans for the day, fragments of ordinary domestic life. But even these moments were framed by the constant presence of security personnel positioned discreetly at doorways and windows. The children played in corridors long enough to echo their laughter into distant rooms. Their footsteps skidded across marble floors. Toys were scattered across rugs imported from Europe, yet outside those rugs stood men with weapons, scanning the perimeter through tinted glass. The mansion functioned as a sanctuary, but also as an operational nerve center. In the main study, the mood shifted dramatically. Heavy curtains blocked daylight. Lamps cast concentrated pools of yellow over maps and documents. The air here was dense, often heavy with cigar smoke. Conversations took place in low, deliberate tones. Associates arrived in armored vehicles, escorted through layered security checkpoints before entering the house. Footsteps approaching the study carried significance. Doors closed with finality. Decisions were made that rippled outward across borders. From within those walls, routes were coordinated, alliances negotiated, strategies refined. The estate's isolation allowed for privacy. The mountains absorbed sound, and the long approach road made surveillance difficult. Beyond the visible grandeur lay concealed infrastructure. Underground storage rooms were hidden beneath stone flooring. Narrow passageways connected key sections of the property, enabling movement without exposure. Safe rooms were constructed with reinforced steel stocked with emergency supplies. Hidden communication systems linked the mansion to external networks. The architecture itself reflected escalating paranoia. Additional security layers were installed as tensions grew. Motion sensors, surveillance cameras discreetly embedded within decorative elements, reinforced gates. The perimeter fence became electrified. Watchtowers, designed to resemble ornamental structures, provided elevated vantage points. At night, floodlights turned the estate into an illuminated island against the black mountain backdrop. As external pressure intensified during the height of the drug war in Colombia in the 1980s, the mansion absorbed the psychological strain. News traveled quickly: bombings in urban centers, assassinations, political negotiations, extradition debates. Each development reverberated through the estate's corridors like distant thunder. Inside, the family experienced the consequences of an expanding empire. Telephone calls sometimes arrived in rapid succession. Voices on the other end carried urgency. The atmosphere would shift instantly. Meals would end abruptly. Meetings extended late into the night. Guards doubled their vigilance. On certain evenings, celebrations were held, music echoing across the terraces, guests arriving in formal attire, laughter rising into the warm night air. The pool shimmered beneath artificial lights. Champagne glasses clinked. For a few hours, the mansion resembled a resort rather than a fortified compound. But beyond the perimeter, conflict intensified. The Medellin cartel's activities drew increasing retaliation from rival organizations and law enforcement agencies. Explosions in the city could sometimes be faintly heard from the hills, dull concussions that trembled through glass panes. Helicopters began appearing more frequently in the sky, their silhouettes crossing the moonlit clouds. The estate's isolation, once a symbol of control, began to feel like exposure. From its elevated position, the mansion could see far, but it could also be seen. Within the private rooms, tension seeped into quiet moments. The weight of uncertainty pressed against the walls. Children sensed unease without fully understanding its source. Conversations between adults grew more guarded. Windows that once stood open to welcome mountain air were now kept closed, curtains drawn tight at night. The mansion had become more than a home. It was a pressure chamber. Every corridor carried echoes of decisions that reshaped Colombia's political landscape. The estate was physically removed from the city, yet intimately tied to its violence. The mountains remained silent witnesses. The mist continued to roll in at dusk, wrapping the estate in white obscurity. But beneath that calm exterior, the empire that radiated from these walls was approaching a breaking point. By the mid-1980s, the mansion no longer felt suspended above the world. It felt hunted within it. The air itself seemed heavier. Guards no longer walked the perimeter casually. They scanned the hills with narrowed eyes, rifles pressed tight against their shoulders. The mountains that once served as protection began to resemble concealment, not just for the estate, but for anyone watching it. Fog rolled down in thick waves, swallowing the outer fence, reducing visibility to mere meters. In that white silence, every distant crack of a branch carried weight. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere shifted from opulence to vigilance. The study became the most occupied room in the house. Its dark, paneled walls absorbed tension like sponge to water. Radios buzzed constantly. Shortwave communications crackled with coded messages. The faint odor of hot electronics blended with cigar smoke and sweat. Maps of Colombia lay permanently unfolded across the large wooden desk, marked with lines, routes, territories. Names were circled, names were crossed out. The empire had expanded beyond imagination. Billions flowed through networks controlled from conversations held in this very room. But with expansion came retaliation. The Colombian government intensified its campaign. The United States increased pressure. Extradition became the word that lingered in every corner of the mansion like a curse. Extradition meant removal. Removal meant vulnerability. The mansion reacted physically to that fear. New layers of defense appeared almost overnight. Additional concrete reinforcements were poured beneath the main gate. Armored vehicles remained idling in concealed garages. Bulletproof glass replaced standard panels in several sections of the residence. The once open terraces were partially enclosed with reinforced structures. The transformation was subtle from a distance, but unmistakable up close. The family felt it. Windows were no longer opened freely. Outdoor activities became restricted. The soccer field that once echoed with carefree laughter grew quieter. Helicopters passing overhead no longer seemed distant. They felt deliberate. The sound of rotor blades slicing through thin mountain air lingered longer than it used to, vibrating faintly through the walls. At night, the mansion became an illuminated fortress. Floodlights washed the exterior in sterile white light. Guards positioned at higher vantage points scanned the dark slopes with binoculars. Dogs barked toward shadows no one else could see. Generators hummed continuously, ensuring that no sudden blackout could leave the estate blind. Within the private wing, tension manifested in subtler ways. Conversations lowered to whispers when certain topics arose. Doors were closed more often. Sleep grew lighter. Footsteps in hallways at midnight caused momentary pauses behind bedroom doors. Even silence felt charged. The mansion's walls absorbed everything. Meetings grew longer and more intense. Reports of bombings in Bogotá, assassinations of political figures, the destruction of commercial airliner Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, a national trauma echoed back to these mountains as consequence. While the event occurred far from the estate, its shockwaves reached the mansion's core. Security protocols tightened further. Associates arrived with grim expressions. Discussions extended into early morning hours. Outside the gates, Colombia was changing. Violence escalated. Rival cartels, particularly the Cali cartel, applied pressure from one direction, while state forces closed in from another. Informants became a constant fear. Trust shrank. Paranoia expanded. Inside the mansion, rooms that once hosted lively gatherings now felt cavernous and hollow. The grand dining hall remained immaculate, but meals were often shorter, conversations cautious. Chandeliers still glittered overhead, yet their light revealed more guarded expressions than celebration. There were moments when the estate felt almost suspended between two realities, one of luxury and one of siege. The swimming pool's surface shimmered under artificial lights while, beyond the fence, armed patrols moved through darkness. Expensive artwork hung undisturbed on walls that concealed reinforced steel. Perfume and polished marble masked the faint metallic scent of weaponry always nearby. The psychological toll deepened. Isolation, once chosen, became imposed. Travel grew riskier. Appearances outside the estate were calculated with precision. The mansion transformed from headquarters into sanctuary, from sanctuary into enclosure. Its expansive corridors began to feel narrower, the ceilings lower. In certain quiet hours before dawn, when even the guards spoke little, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The empire was still vast, influence still powerful, but the sense of invincibility had fractured. Every creak of wood, every echo in the hallway, every distant engine on the mountain road carried possibility of betrayal, of confrontation, of collapse. The mansion, built to symbolize permanence, now stood at the center of mounting inevitability. The year 1989 marked a turning point, not only for Colombia, but for the mansion itself. By then, the estate no longer felt like a palace perched above the valley. It felt like a target suspended in open terrain. The mountain air grew sharper that year, or perhaps it only seemed that way. Patrol vehicles began appearing more frequently on distant roads. Helicopters circled lower, sometimes hovering long enough to rattle window panes. The sound no longer faded quickly into the distance. It lingered, reverberating against the hills, pressing against the mansion's reinforced walls. Inside, the study transformed into a war room. The polished wooden desk was rarely cleared. Newspapers lay scattered across its surface, headlines detailing bombings, political upheaval, escalating operations by Colombian authorities. Extradition to the United States was no longer theoretical. It was a looming reality. Each article was read in silence, each development recalculated within these walls. The mansion's architecture responded to crisis. More barriers were installed, access points were reduced, certain hallways were sealed. Steel doors, previously concealed behind decorative wood paneling, were tested and reinforced. Escape routes were reviewed. Safe rooms were stocked with additional provisions. The estate's isolation, once empowering, now created vulnerability. From the terraces, the view remained stunning, a panoramic sweep of green hills dissolving into mist. But beauty had become irrelevant. That same elevation allowed anyone with binoculars to observe the property from afar. The mountains were no longer simply protection. They were exposure. The family lived within tightening boundaries. Outdoor gatherings ceased almost entirely. The swimming pool sat undisturbed, its surface still and reflective beneath grey skies. The soccer field became overgrown at its edges. Children spent more time indoors, their movements echoing through long corridors. Their laughter still surfaced, but it was softer, quickly hushed when unfamiliar sounds carried from outside. Telephones rang with increasing urgency. Voices on the other end spoke rapidly. Meetings became more frequent and more volatile. Disagreements erupted behind closed doors in the study, muffled but unmistakable. The weight of decisions pressed heavily against the room's dark walls. The mansion absorbed the emotional temperature of its occupants. In the grand hall, once used for celebrations, the chandeliers remained lit, but gatherings were rare. Associates entered with tense expressions, often staying only briefly before departing under armed escort. Conversations were shorter, trust thinner. Beyond the estate, the war intensified. The assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in August 1989 shook the nation. Its political consequences accelerated the government's resolve. Within the mansion, news of the killing arrived quickly. Radios relayed updates. Newspapers were delivered with urgency. The gravity of the situation settled heavily across every room. Security doubled again. Guards rotated in larger numbers. The perimeter fence was inspected daily. Surveillance expanded beyond the property's boundaries. Vehicles approaching the gate were scrutinized intensely, even those previously considered routine. The once grand entrance now felt like a checkpoint in a conflict zone. At night, the estate resembled an island of artificial light surrounded by darkness. Floodlights burned relentlessly. Shadows moved across walls as guards shifted positions. The distant sounds of the valley, engines, occasional gunfire, sirens carried faintly on wind, reached the property in fragmented echoes. Sleep grew scarce. The psychological pressure inside the mansion thickened. Conversations in the private wing carried fatigue. Curtains remained drawn longer each morning. Doors that once stood open were kept closed. Even silence had weight. By late 1989, government operations intensified further. Intelligence units narrowed their focus. Informants provided details. The walls of the mansion, no matter how reinforced, could not block the sense of encroachment. The estate's grandeur began to feel almost surreal against the escalating violence. Marble floors reflected light as they always had. Imported furniture remained pristine. Paintings hung undisturbed. Yet beneath the surface, the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. The mansion was no longer simply the center of an empire. It had become the symbol of one, and symbols attract consequences. By 1990, the mansion's silence became deceptive. From a distance, it still appeared majestic, a sprawling estate suspended in green mountains, its white facade glowing under the Colombian sun. The terraces remained immaculate. The gates stood tall and fortified, but beneath that exterior, the atmosphere had curdled into something strained and brittle. The war outside had evolved. The search operations intensified under the Colombian National Police, supported by U.S. intelligence. Surveillance networks expanded, informants multiplied, the word extradition echoed through political chambers and, inevitably, through the reinforced walls of the mansion. Inside, the estate felt less like a fortress and more like a narrowing corridor. The study remained the epicenter. Its heavy wooden door closed more frequently, sealing inside arguments that no longer remained calm. Reports were read aloud in tense voices. Names of trusted associates surfaced in uncomfortable contexts: interrogations, defections, arrests. Loyalty, once assumed, now required constant verification. The mansion's communication lines were monitored with increasing caution. Conversations shifted to shorter bursts. Radios replaced telephones in some instances. Handwritten notes were used, then destroyed. Ashtrays overflowed as tension rose. The faint smell of burning paper mixed with tobacco smoke, clinging to curtains and upholstery. Outside, the estate's perimeter thickened with vigilance. Guards scanned not just the distant hills, but each other. The mountains were still and green, but no longer felt protective. Every vehicle sound on the access road triggered a chain reaction of alerts. Every unexpected delay in a scheduled arrival raised suspicion. The family's world contracted further. Children's routines changed. Private tutors replaced outside schooling. Outings became rare and heavily escorted. Windows that once framed sweeping valley views now remained covered more often than not. The vastness of the estate began to feel confining. At dusk, when the sky turned violet over Antioquia's hills, the mansion carried a strange duality. Its pool reflected the fading light in serene ripples. Tropical birds settled into nearby trees. The breeze carried the scent of damp earth and trimmed hedges. It looked like tranquility, yet inside, movement never stopped. Meetings extended deep into the night. Maps were revised, routes reconsidered. Negotiations with the Colombian government were whispered about. The possibility of surrender under specific conditions. The idea of constructing a custom prison to avoid extradition. The mansion became the setting where these unprecedented proposals were debated. The concept of La Catedral, a self-designed detention facility, began to materialize within these walls. If surrender became inevitable, it would occur on controlled terms. The mansion's study, once a command center for expansion, now functioned as a negotiation chamber for containment. The psychological weight intensified. The estate's architecture, designed to project dominance, now amplified vulnerability. High ceilings made rooms feel exposed. Long corridors echoed with footsteps that sounded too loud. Mirrors reflected anxious expressions. Even the grand staircase, carved with elegance, seemed to descend into uncertainty. Rumors of internal betrayal began circulating. Associates suspected of cooperating with authorities were discussed behind closed doors. Trust eroded gradually, like stone under constant rain. At night, the mansion's lights burned brighter than ever, as if defying encroaching darkness. Floodlights cast harsh beams across hedges and guard towers. Shadows stretched long and distorted across walls. Armed silhouettes moved methodically along parapets. The estate no longer hosted celebrations. The dining hall's long table often remained unused, its polished surface collecting fine dust between tense gatherings. The chandeliers hung silent. Crystal glasses remained untouched in cabinets. The mansion had become a space suspended between power and surrender. In June 1991, after prolonged negotiations with the Colombian government, the decision was finalized. Pablo Escobar would surrender under the condition that he would not be extradited and would serve time in a prison of his own design, La Catedral, built on another hillside overlooking Medellin. The announcement reverberated through the mansion like a distant detonation. Preparations began quietly. Sensitive documents were removed. Certain rooms were cleared. Communication systems were dismantled or relocated. The estate felt as if it were shedding layers of itself. On the final days before departure, the mansion carried an eerie stillness. The terraces overlooked the valley as they always had. The air smelled of mountain mist and trimmed grass. But inside, the realization settled heavily. The era of the mansion as headquarters of an untouchable empire had ended. Its walls had witnessed ambition, expansion, and escalating violence. Now they stood on the threshold of abandonment. The mansion remains, even after the surrender, even after the prison on the hill, even after the pursuit that ended on a Medellin rooftop in December 1993, when gunfire closed the final chapter of a life that had once radiated power from those marble corridors. The estate did not vanish with him. Its terraces still face the valley, its walls still stand against mountain wind. But time has altered its presence. Paint has peeled, iron has rusted, windows have shattered, vegetation has crept across once manicured gardens. The soccer field faded into uneven grass. The pool drained into stillness. What was once a fortress of control became an abandoned monument to fragility. Inside, silence replaced strategy. The study that once hosted maps and coded negotiations became a hollow room layered in dust. The grand dining hall, where crystal once reflected candlelight, now absorbs only filtered daylight through broken panes. The air carries the scent of damp concrete and decay, rather than polished wood and expensive cologne. Yet the psychological weight lingers. Locals speak of the property in lowered voices. Some describe unexplained sounds at dusk, the wind pushing through corridors, metal creaking softly. Others recall the years when helicopters circled overhead and the mountains echoed with distant detonations. The mansion remains embedded in collective memory, not merely as architecture but as atmosphere. It was a place where family life unfolded beside escalating violence, where laughter and fear coexisted under chandeliers, where decisions altered the trajectory of a nation, where luxury masked siege, where isolation intensified paranoia. The estate absorbed everything. It witnessed the rise of an empire fueled by billions in narcotics trafficking. It endured the escalation of bombings, assassinations, and political warfare. It felt the pressure of extradition debates and negotiations that reshaped Colombian law. It became both sanctuary and symbol, then relic. Today, the mountains of Antioquia remain unchanged in their vastness. Clouds still descend at dusk. The wind still moves through tall grass with a low, continuous murmur, but the mansion stands as a scar carved into that landscape, not merely because of who lived there, but because of what happened within, around, and because of it. Its corridors once carried the footsteps of power. Now they carry only echoes. If this documentary immersed you in the weight of that place, in the suffocating tension of its walls, in the emotional gravity of its silence, continue exploring the untold histories hidden inside forgotten structures. Subscribe and follow for more deeply investigated historical documentaries where architecture becomes witness and places reveal the truths time tried to bury.